Welcome everyone back to the Mind Your Money podcast, a show hosted by public.com that examines the relationship between investing, human behavior, and happiness. I'm Douglas Bonaparte, president of Bonafide Wealth.
I'm Morgan Housel. Today we're going to be talking about what everybody else is talking about, which is the new social media platform Threads and why Mark Zuckerberg keeps trampling his competitors.
Later in the show, we're speaking with the one and only Daniel Pink, the author of several New York Times bestsellers, including Drive, The Power of Regret, and To Sell is Human. We're going to talk about how regret can be used as a tool to make better decisions and how it can be a dangerous liability if not managed properly. But first, let's kick things off with a thread about Threads. Morgan, what are your early thoughts on this platform and its potential to be a Twitter killer? It's here, is it?
I mean, the preamble here is that I've been addicted to Twitter for 12 years, as tens, hundreds of millions of other people have as well. And when Threads came out last night, within 30 seconds of using it, I said, Twitter's done. Twitter is screwed. This is going to be it. But here's the question. Why? And what's interesting is I'm sure it'll get better, but Threads today, as of this morning, to set the time here, it came out less than 24 hours ago as we are taping this year.
I got it late last night. I got it. Yeah.
By almost any technical definition, it's worse than Twitter. There are countless features that Threads does not have that Twitter has. There's nothing there. But everybody, me, you, and everyone else you see on Threads is saying, this is it. This is the one. I love it. And I guarantee you, it's true for me. I have spent 5 times as much more time on Threads in the last 24 hours than I would have on Twitter. So the question is why? I think so many people yearn for something new because a lot of people, their experience on Twitter 3, 5, 7, 10 years ago was magic. And it's tapered off since then. But then you start to answer, like, why is that? I've long had this theory well before this happened with Twitter and Threads that almost nothing stays cool for more than 10 years. Nothing. It's true for cities. Like San Francisco was the coolest city in America for the 2010s. And now it's like fallen off into a joke. It's true for styles. It's true for music. It's true for anything. And I think Twitter, even if it was actually great over the last 6 months, 12 months, people just got tired of loading the same app day after day. Nothing stays cool for 10 years. And then there's also kind of like the gut feelings that some people have towards Musk, which I understand about, especially when this thing used to be such a big part of your life and it used to be so powerful. And you view, rightly or wrongly, that the richest man came in the world and broke it. You're so eager to get revenge. And you don't even want a new app. You want revenge over the guy who broke what you used to have. I think that's at least part of what's going on here.
Okay, so I'm with you on part of it. I think those vibes are there. And I've been same with you. I've been playing on it 5 times. We're both, I guess, power users of Twitter. We have big followings. We use it. We're addicted. We know the algorithm. It flows through our bloodstream. And here comes Threads, literally copy paste of Twitter. You're right. There's no hashtags. There's no DM. It seems a little quirky to me that, all right, fine. It integrates over into Instagram. Like you can, hit the envelope, a little paper airplane and bring your thread over into your story. So I got to work with 2 apps here. My point is this. I did what you're saying. But right now, I think is this moment where nobody knows what they're doing on Threads and nobody knows how the algorithm works. And it's fun. It's fun because everyone is at 0. Now, I know celebrities have come in a day before and have brought big swaths of following. So not everyone's starting at like 0 followers, but everyone's starting at 0. You don't know what you're doing here. I wouldn't go as far as to say like the Wild West, but everyone's trying stuff. Like even me, I'm posting on there every, hour or something. I'll do a meme. I'll do a serious post. I shot a video. I'm just trying to see what works. I'm kind of excited that I got nothing to lose here. Right? And especially for the big accounts over on Twitter who have been, and I'll speak for myself here, become so concerned with the content that they create that they don't want to disturb or disrupt or upset their audience that's expecting something. Nobody's expecting anything out of me over here. And it's actually unlocked my ability to create. And I think this will only happen for a little while, as there will be, whether it's hashtags or news for you. Heather, my wife, just today, who's been playing around with it as well, is like, I can't even get my news here. Like, I wouldn't know what's going on by just being on Thread. So the evolution of this platform, there's no ads, right? We're in an ad-free Threads. What's that going to look like? How good, native, abysmal, disturbing to the flow of your feed is that going to be? We're just given this like very raw, very basic form of like Twitter, and everyone just gets a shot to go do crazy stuff. And I'm here for that. But I also know that ain't going to last.
I mean, this is what happened to the big Facebook app, the blue Facebook app. Like, it was the coolest thing in the world for everyone circa 2010, 11, 12. And today, if you are under the age of 60 and you're using the Facebook app, like, walk yourself out of the room. It's not going to work. But why did that happen? Did the app stop working? Did it break? No, it just got not cool anymore. So I think a lot of these things have like a 10-year shelf life. You're totally right too about nobody knows what they're doing on Threads. But everybody there has social media experience on Twitter, virtually everyone at least. And so this is not like Twitter in 2007 where people just didn't really know what it was for. And it's almost like the example is, or the analogy is, everyone is like, you're a really talented banker at Goldman Sachs, and then you move to Morgan Stanley. Like, you know what you're doing. You've done this before. You have skills, but you have no idea what the new culture is. And you're just kind of testing out what is appropriate and what is not, and what works and what doesn't. I also wonder, like, at least from the information that's out there, that Twitter's ad revenue has fallen 59% in the last year, roughly since Musk took over. 59%. And that's where the layoffs come from. That's where everything. And even if Threads were to siphon off, I'm making this up, 20% of users, which does not seem unreasonable. It could be way more than that. How precarious is Twitter to bankruptcy at this point? I don't know. I don't think anyone outside of the core Twitter investors and employees really know the answer to that question. But then you brought up competition, about how it's great now that there's competitors. I'm completely making this up, but it seems like if Facebook were to go, or excuse me, if Twitter were to go bankrupt, Mark Zuckerberg would be like, let me have it. And then you integrate all of your Twitter followers, they just all integrated in. And then there's one, it's the new Twitter. And there's part of me that's like, I think I would actually take that relative to what we have now, because A, it would be cool again because it's new. And B, you would have the infrastructure and the employees to keep it going that Twitter has axed off in the last 12 months.
All right. So what about this? Like, Twitter is the de facto town square, right? It's the town hall right now. That's the way I would describe it. Like, and maybe because I'm too close to using all of these platforms, there's something that's not rubbing me the right way about, having to flip between, I already flip between Twitter and Instagram, right? I'm getting my video content. I don't mess with TikTok. I know I should, all right, there's TikTok too, which I think is the rival to the stories and the reels over on Instagram, and maybe the demographics run different, so they both have a spot. But there's something about going between Twitter for its town hall purpose and Instagram to go, binge video content. I'm not even that interested in the pictures on there, honestly. It's the video content that I'm there for. But then I gotta flip out of that to I'm losing track of the names here, to Threads, to go see pretty much Twitter again. I'm kind of curious as to why Threads didn't just get directly integrated into Instagram to remove that friction, and whether that will actually come to haunt, Threads' long-term survival. And the last thing I'll say is, there's going to be an inflection point here where the hype of this thing dies down. I mean, like, Threads has to continue to roll out features that continue to make people go, cool, that feature's here now. I'm going to spend more time here. That feature's here now. Or this is a new feature that I don't have over there that I am now going to tinker with and get my time. Otherwise, I think there's a real risk that people are like, this was cool. I'm not going to watch videos on Threads. I'm going to go back to Instagram. And if I want to know what's going on in the world and follow my favorite meme accounts or hear from my favorite celebrities, Twitter it is. And I think I
think as long as Threads matches what Twitter has, and of course they have the employees and the infrastructure to implement all of that, it'll win. I think that's the only bar they have to clear is it at least as good as Twitter? And I think that's a pretty low bar given where Twitter is, as long as they can do that. I don't think they have to reinvent the wheel or come up with any like spicy, shiny new feature. I just think they just need to recreate Twitter.
Are the core Twitter users really that upset with Twitter that they would really want to in mass? And we don't have any data, right? We're making this shit up. We don't have
No,
any
we do.
data.
We do have in the first 14 hours, there were
Yes,
30 million thread
30
signups in
million.
14.
But we,
It's
we
such
don't,
it's an incomprehensible number
yeah,
for a brand new product.
it's insane. However, here I am defending Twitter. It's insane. However, you have how many Instagram and Facebook users to go make that happen? I mean, it's already there. It's not like Vine video was recreated again. It's like when TikTok showed up. At this point, I'm more impressed with a social media platform that never existed, and isn't backed by any or already established site that is able to bring in users like that. That to me is more impressive.
So
Not
my guess, and it's just a guess, my guess is of those 30 million signups in the first 14 hours, 90% of them or 95% of them were active Twitter users.
you can you're entitled to your opinion. I was thinking maybe something more along the lines of like 30 to maybe 50%. I think the vast majority were Instagram and Facebook users. Will we ever get this data?
Doug, Mark Zuckerberg's comment about what he wants Threads to be is a friendly place that promotes kindness and whatnot. And I just thought, okay, great goal and whatnot. But as soon as you get critical mass, humanity comes out. And the
Yeah,
humanity, as everyone's seen from social media, the bigger it gets, the crazier, the ruder, the meaner it always gets. So I'm like, okay, cool goal. And maybe the algorithm will like only promote kindness. But the other thing we've seen from social media is that what gets clicks, what gets advertisers is the stuff that's the most controversial.
of course. Yeah, this is kind of stuff that I don't buy that for a second, right? I don't buy that that Threads is going to become, this utopia of kindness. I think one of my first threads was, the guy rubbing his hands, the football player in the yellow jacket, you know, crypto scammers, and basically making a joke that it's only a matter of time before the crypto scammers come out and start doing that. And, I was impressed right off the bat. I didn't see any of that. It was still clean cut, pure social media happening. Still, probably right now, it's still pretty clean. And then today, actually, I guess within the 24-hour window, I actually did see a reply that was a copy of a thread that was like a forex crypto type thing. So there we go. It's inevitable. This won't be. I mean, come on. I haven't been on Facebook in a long, long time, but you go read the comments in any neighborhood, what are they called? Pages for like your local town or a mom's group or a dad group. The second a political hand grenade is thrown into there or someone says something about kids or politics or whatever, it gets unhinged. All the hot takes, all the grime comes out. So coming to a threads near you, it's inevitable. Would you agree with that? Like, just give
Yeah,
it time.
yeah, it's great right now before that's happened. It's like Threads still got the new social network smell, and it's great.
Yeah. And that's kind of my only thing I'm certain about right now, right? We could literally say whatever we want in terms of the future of Threads as a platform, but only thing I know, right, I would immediately discount anyone who thinks they know what they're talking about, including us. And then two, is this, hey, enjoy like I would say this, go and it was Gary V who said it. It's not going to be Twitter or Threads. It's Twitter and Threads. And I think I would agree with his biggest point on this in a video he did yesterday, which is you got to try new things. And I think you are being rewarded right now by trying this new platform because I'll admit, kind of fun right now. And how long will that fun last? I don't know, man. Does Zuck know how to party and have fun? All right, that was super fun. There you go. All things threads here in the new age of social media. But now let's bring on our guest, Daniel Pink.
Dan, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for doing this. I heard this quote years ago from Daniel Kahneman, and he was asked what you need to be a good investor. And he said one of the things you need to be a good investor was a well-calibrated sense of your future regret. And I was like, yes, that's so good. That is so smart. That's like in my view, that was the definition of risk, is what are you going to regret in the future? And then, of course, there's a very well-known Jeff Bezos interview where he talks about the regret minimization framework, where his goal in life basically is to be on his deathbed and have as few regrets as possible. And then my last little anecdote here before I turn this over to you is David Cassidy. His last words on his deathbed were, "So much wasted time." And I remember reading that and thinking like, that's the worst feeling. That's the worst sense of regret that anyone could have on their deathbed. Your book on regret, though, that came out about a year and a half ago, flips a lot of this on its head. And as you so often do, gives the other side of it that's easy to overlook about the power of regret and how sometimes regrets kind of force us into action to make sure we don't make those same mistakes again. My first question for you, where did you get this idea for this book? You've written so many books. Where was the aha moment of where this came from?
Well, first I want to say that I'm delighted that I won my Kahneman Bezos David Cassidy parlay bet for today. So thank you for that. That cashed in at 36-1. So I appreciate that, Morgan. Yeah, I know it's a big day for the Pink family. I got it basically based on experience, and it really began. The idea for this book actually began in a strange way at my elder daughter's graduation from college. I don't know if you guys have quite hit that milestone in your life, but it's a jarring milestone because it has so much to do with time, as David Cassidy is saying. And you see a kid who's 22 years old walk across the stage, and you think, "Holy crap! This kid was just born. How can this possibly be happening?" And also, you look at yourself and say, "How can I possibly have a kid who's 22 years old? Because I myself am only like 29." And as I started reflecting on this, I realized I had a lot of regrets about my own college experience. I wish I had worked harder, for instance. I wish I had been kinder. And when I came back to Washington, where I live, I very sheepishly began telling some people about these regrets. And I was sheepish because I knew no one wanted to talk about their regrets, because it's like, no. You just move on, be positive, look forward. And what I discovered is that everybody wanted to talk about this stuff that opened the floodgates. And, as a writer, that's an incredible response. When people just kind of gush forward. And so to make a long story longer, I was actually working on an entirely different book, which I put aside and started looking at this research on this emotion and found some new ways into the research and said, you know what, I'm going to do this. I don't think this is a book that I would have written in my early 30s. It's a book in my early 50s that felt maybe inevitable.
Now, talk a little bit. Do you think Bezos is right about the regret minimization framework, that we should go through our lives trying to have as few regrets as possible? Or is there this upside to them that's so easy to overlook?
I think it's a little more complicated than that. Okay. So let me come at that in two different ways. The first thing that we know is that everybody has regrets, that if you live your life, you are going to have regrets. That every single person listening to this conversation has some kind of regret. The only people who don't have regrets, as I write in this book, are 5-year-olds, because their brains haven't developed enough, people with certain kinds of neurodegenerative diseases, and sociopaths. But if you're not, brain damaged or sociopath, or a kid, a tiny little kid, you have regrets. And what we need to do is normalize those regrets and understand that it's part of the human experience, that regrets are adaptive, that in some ways, I think in some very big ways, we are in some way over-indexed on positive emotions, especially in America. We think that the only way to live a good life is to be positive all the time and to always look forward and never look back. And that's bullshit. That's a bad recipe. What we want to do is we want to actually not ignore our regrets and not wallow in our regrets, but confront our regrets, derive lessons from them, use them to help us improve our future. So that's one thing. Now, with regard to the Bezos thing, he's right mostly. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. It's important to minimize the right kind of regrets. And one of the things that I discovered is that in amassing this database, I went out and did something called the World Regrets Survey, where I collected regrets now from over 25,000 people in 110 countries. And what we find is that around the world, people seem to have the same 4 regrets. And these regrets give us a sense, kind of a reverse image of what people want out of life. So let me be specific on the regret optimization. I think what you want to do is you want to minimize the right kind of regrets, and you want to forget about everything else. Let me tell you what I mean by that. If I say, this is a real life example here. So we had some roofers out at our house here in Washington, D.C., because we had to replace the roof on our very old house. Now, I could say, okay, I want the very best roofer in the Delmarva area. I don't want to have any regrets about not getting the world-class roofer here at the Pink House. I think that's a bad idea. I think you want to get a good roofer, and you want to actually satisfy on a lot of that kind of stuff. If I think about what I had for lunch today, I just want to satisfy on that. If you think about what car you're going to buy, you know, in 10 years, you're not going to care. But there's certain things that we know from 25,000 people that they care deeply about. Did you build a stable foundation for your family and your team and yourself? Did you take risks, the right kind of risk? Did you live life fully? Did you connect with people you care about? Did you do the right thing? And I think if we optimize and maximize on those, that is a very effective recipe for a life well lived.
I was reading a Harvard Business Review study that was about regret, and it was trying to link practicing gratitude as a way to deal with regret. And I would be very interested. Everyone says this, right? Oh, just, practice gratitude and most of the things in your life will feel all of a sudden better, right? You hear this with meditation, but I love your take on how gratitude is a tool, and whether or not you've come across that being something that helps either minimize or maximize the types of regrets that you want or don't want in your life.
Yeah, gratitude is good. I mean, the evidence on that is overwhelming, that gratitude is generally good for us. But there is a paradox here of sorts, and it comes from the fact that regret feels bad. All right, so here's a way to think about it. One of the amazing things about our brains is that we can do counterfactual thinking. We can get into a little time machine in our head, go backward in time, rework what really happened, get back into our time machine, come into the present and see the present reconfigured because of what we did in the past. All right, counterfactual thinking. It's incredible. All right, it's a superpower of the human brain. There are 2 kinds of counterfactuals that we can do. One of them is what's called a downward counterfactual, where you imagine how things could have turned out worse, right? So I shouldn't have married Bob. I regret marrying Bob, but at least I have these 2 great kids that I'm grateful for. I shouldn't have moved to St. Louis, but I'm grateful that I have such nice next door neighbors. All right? So you imagine how things could have turned out worse. Downward counterfactuals, at least, make us feel better. No question about it, and it's good to feel better. Upward counterfactuals are how you imagine how things could have been better. If only I had studied architecture instead of human resources, I would be a more satisfied professional. All right? Upward counterfactuals make us feel worse, but they help us do better if we treat them right. And the thing is, what people want is they want the do better part, but they don't want the feel worse part. And that's not the offer. that upward counterfactuals make us feel worse and help us do better. They help us do better because they make us feel worse. That spear of negativity prompts us to reassess our strategy and do things differently. So gratitude, I'm all for it. But gratitude doesn't always help you do better. And a way to think about it, and the way I wrote about it in this book is this: portfolio theory, man. You know, Markowitz. You know, we want to have some diversity. And we want to have some diversity in our investment portfolio, but we want to have some diversity in our emotional portfolio. You want to have a lot of positive emotions. You want to have more positive emotions and negative emotions. But you don't want only positive emotions, because negative emotions help us. And when we line up all the negative emotions, and we have 60 years of research on this, the most common negative emotion that people experience is regret. And the reason is because if we treat it right, it's useful. And we have mounds of evidence showing that if we treat our regrets properly, It helps us become better problem solvers. It helps us become better strategists. It helps us avoid cognitive biases. It helps us think more clearly. It helps us become better, faster problem solvers. It helps us find more meaning in life. And so we just want a little bit of a balance here. We want a smidge of negative emotions because they make us better. They make us better because they make us feel worse. And so the idea that you should go through life feeling only good is a bad recipe for living.
And when I think about my own life, I often reflect on how much worse things could have been if I hadn't made these tiny little know-nothing decisions in the past. If I hadn't met my wife this day, if I hadn't accepted this job, if I hadn't done X, Y, and Z, everything would have fallen apart. Are people more attracted to the negative versus the positive counterfactual? Do people kind of wallow in the what ifs in one direction or another?
It's a great question, Morgan. And the truth is that people are much more likely to make an upward counterfactual and if only negative counterfactual than a positive counterfactual. And I think that's because done right, it's adaptive. Done too much, it's way maladaptive. And so I think it's important for us to be sort of bilingual, ambidextrous, call it what you will, and be able to do both upward counterfactuals and downward counterfactuals, to be able to say both if only and also at least. Because they have different effects on our current emotions, but they also have profoundly different effects on our future performance. Again, at least make us feel better. They don't help us do better. If onlys make us feel worse and therefore can make us do better.
I want to press that a little further. Do you think you get an edge by being a little bit more comfortable or better at the negative by thriving there? Or are you suggesting that really the balance, like all day long in the middle, be good at both? I'm going to take a shot at this and say getting good at the negative side would actually be some alpha generating behavior.
I think that's generally right. If you don't over-index on that negative behavior, if you're not always sort of regretting and so forth. And we have some evidence of this. There's some interesting papers about, I think it's narrower than you're talking about. Some interesting evidence from executives looking at executive behavior. So executives who leaned into their regrets rather than elide their regrets end up becoming better strategists because the ones who are kind of saying, hey, no, things happen for a reason. It's positive. Let's be positive. Let's think they end up not improving nearly as much as the ones who are leaning into their regrets. The thing is that there's a degree of suffering that comes from actually confronting one's regrets. Now, that we have specific ways to get better at channeling that mild suffering into productive behavior, but as I've sort of been harping on in this conversation, I just think that we've just gone a little too far on positivity all the time. Being positive all the time is not a recipe for a life well lived.
And that seems like an important thing. It seems like the window between positive behavior coming out of your regrets and just kind of slipping into depression about what you regret. It seems like it's a pretty small sliver. At least it could be for some people. Where do you find that balance between this is going to help me into action?
It's small because we don't know how to do it. And the territory widens once you know how to do it. So for instance, let me give you an example of that. So one of the most important things you can do in the face of your own regrets is there's a kind of triangulation here, right? So we want to go a third way. We don't want to ignore it. We don't want to wallow. And the same thing is true in the very first, when you start confronting your own regrets, you have sort of two ways to go. You can basically beat yourself up, lacerating self-criticism and self-talk, which we all do. There's so many of us in the face of mistakes and screw-ups. The way we talk to ourselves is brutal. I mean, if you were to channel my self-talk, basically broadcast it out of my head into a microphone, out there into the world, you would think I was nuts. If I talk to other people the way I talk to myself in a workplace, I'd be fired. All right, here's what the research tells us on that. Don't do that. There's no evidence in the literature that this lacerating self-criticism boosts performance. There isn't. Now, what's interesting about this is that you go to the other side, the kind of the self-esteem movement. There's very little evidence that that boosts performance. What seems to boost performance more than anything else is one of the most underappreciated bodies of research out there is started by a woman named Kristen Neff at the University of Texas called self-compassion. Self-compassion. Even though it sounded to me, to my sort of hard-headed ears, a little gooey, that phrase. We have 20 years of evidence that what you should do is treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt. Recognize that mistakes are part of the human condition. Recognize that you're not that special. That is, any regret that either of you guys have, I can find it in 43 seconds in this database of 25,000 regrets. Any regret that I have, I can find. You're not that special. Regrets are part of the human experience. Mistakes are part of the human experience. Treat yourself with kindness rather than contempt, and understand that any misstep is a moment in your life, not the full measure of your life. And it turns out that approach is productive. And no one ever teaches us how to do it. So that's one thing that we can do. Another thing that we can do is we can talk about our regrets. We can even write about our regrets. There's some very interesting research, again, also from the University of Texas. James Pennebaker has found over many, many years that when we write about negative emotions, we convert this blobby abstraction to concrete words. That makes them less menacing. There is sometimes a relief in disclosure. And then it's very important that we actually think analytically and draw a lesson from them. What did I learn from this, and what am I going to do differently? And when we take that systematic approach, treat ourselves with kindness, not contempt, disclose and talk about them, and explicitly draw lessons from them, then it's like the reason that it seems like that's hard to do is that we don't know how to do it. Once you know how to do it, it becomes hygienic in a way.
And do you think there's a modern? No, Doug, your turn. Go for it.
So I like everything you just said. I'm told that often in my own therapy session. So I'm glad I'm getting good value out of those weekly appointments here. Be easy on yourself. I'm told that a lot, but it's great advice. It really is. Treat yourself with some grace. Look, this is a money podcast. We talk about all things having to do with money and personal finance here. So it wouldn't be right if we didn't talk about the relationship between risk and regret. Regret doesn't necessarily have to come from, taking on, risk and it not panning out. But it's hard to not have the conversation of how these two things aren't connected. And we'd love our audience to know how we can think about the functions of risk and regret. I'd love to hear that from you.
Yeah. So risk isn't. So I'm a little bit hesitant to talk about with any certainty about risk, because risk is in some ways a kind of a mathematical point. That is, how much, what are the probabilities, and how much of that high or low probability are you willing to withstand at what price? Now, what we also see, though, are two very important things. The first is that one of the big categories of regrets from around the world are what I call boldness regrets. Okay, a boldness regret is when someone's at a juncture in their life and they have a choice. They can play it safe or they can take the chance. They can play it safe or they can take the chance. And it doesn't matter the domain of life. It's just that moment. I have hundreds of people who regret not asking somebody out on a date years ago. They're not spinning wild fantasies that they would become married to that person or whatever, but they say, at that moment, I could have stepped up and taken a shot, and I didn't, and I regret that. You have lots of people who regret not starting businesses. You have some people who regret starting businesses that went south on them. But for every one of those, you have 50 who regret not starting a business. You regret people who regret not studying abroad, people who regret not speaking up at work. That there is this thing that at this juncture in our lives, play it safe versus taking the chance, people tend to regret not taking the chance. Now, again, that's different from risk. That doesn't say put all your money in, Bitcoin, which is but what it says is that as a principle of life, I think there's a very strong argument for a bias toward action, for doing stuff, for trying stuff, even if there's uncertainty about where it's going to lead. One other data point: I did a very large public opinion survey, the largest public opinion survey of American attitudes about regret ever conducted. It's a really good survey, and I did it with a very large sample to look for demographic differences in what people regret by race, by gender. I looked at belief in God, introversion, extroversion. I mean, it was amazing. I spent a lot of time and a lot of money, and I found very few demographic differences. The one demographic difference that I found, which was powerful, was age. And here's what we found. When people in their 20s tend to have equal numbers of regrets of action and inaction, equal numbers of regrets about what they did and what they didn't do. But over time, it's not even close. 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, it's 2-to-1, sometimes 3-to-1 regrets of inaction over regrets of action. And it's probably one of the starkest. It's also in the existing literature. I had this massive, like I said, this massive survey, and we're not finding like statistically significant things in most realms. But on this one, you have this like this giant thing calling out at us that over time we regret what we didn't do much more than what we did. And I think there's a giant lesson there.
I feel like when we talk about risk and counterfactuals, there's probably this situation where people tell themselves totally false stories about what could have been. So you look back and you say, oh, what if I hadn't taken this job? Well, the other job probably might have been okay too. And that job that you didn't take would have sucked anyways. What if I had bought this stock? You probably would have sold anyways halfway through. Like, you're always telling yourself a fake story about what could have been. And maybe one takeaway from that is like, no matter what you do, even if you take the chance and it all works out, you're still going to regret something. We're just regretful at our nature because we're constantly telling ourselves a fake story about what could have been in this different world.
I think that's possible, and I think we can steer around that. And that goes to one of your earlier questions about regretting the right things. Like, to me, it's very clear. Here we go. Let's put on our calendars a second half of this interview in 10 years. All right. And I want you to think about having a conversation with the three of us in 10 years. I can predict pretty well what all three of us are going to regret. And not a single one of us is going to regret having bought a gray car versus a blue car this year. All right. What we are going to regret is I had a friend or someone I cared about and I wanted to reach out to them and I didn't reach out to them. And now we've grown further apart, or I don't even have the opportunity to do that. I had a chance to live fully, take chances, do stuff, see stuff. And you know what? 10 years went by and I didn't do anything. I was at a juncture where I could do the right thing or the wrong thing, and I did the wrong thing, and it still bugs me. And so what's really important is that we don't, have the kind of fabulism that you're talking about, Morgan, on everything, but actually use this powerful emotion to make better decisions about what really matters. And one of the things that we know is that, and I'm not saying in investing, although maybe in investing too, but in regular lives, most of our decisions don't matter, but some of them matter significantly. And so, you see this with, people, spending hours and hours and hours figuring out what silverware to buy for their house and not spending time saying, how can I spend more time with my friends and my loved ones? And so, and again, we can use this powerful emotion and this understanding of what people regret to make better decisions about what matters. And most stuff doesn't matter. And that's not anything we want to hear, but most stuff doesn't matter.
I think you're spot on with that. I stumbled across, and I forget whose thread it was, no pun intended with what's going on right now with Instagram and Threads and all that, or Meta and Threads. It was a thread about, you're going to see an old friend, get invited out for drinks with an old friend who's in town, from your childhood. And you ask yourself, really, how many more times you're going to have the opportunity to go get that drink. And when you really think about it critically, it's something like 4, maybe exactly 2 or 3. And it's extraordinary. So you're spot on, right? When you break it down or you reword it like that about people in your life, whether it's your kids or your friends or family, you don't get too many cracks at that. Like, that time is certainly super fleeting. I feel a little silly because I thought 10 years from now, our mutual regret would be not getting the Grimace Berry Purple Shake from McDonald's that has now been pulled from the shelf. But, okay, time with loved ones works just the same, I guess, here.
Yeah, I mean, but that what you're talking about there, Doug, is actually a really, really healthy move. And there's some really good research on this. Cassie Holmes at UCLA has done this kind of work. Laura Carstensen started this work about time perspectives. Hal Hirschfield, also at UCLA, has done a lot of this. And that is a very good technique. I'll testify to it by making a decision that I did very recently in my own life. So I've got a 20-year-old son. He just finished his sophomore year of college. He goes to college in the Midwest, and we live in Washington, and he has a summer job in New Orleans. And so he came back to Washington, and he said, we have this like old car, this 10-year-old Prius that we're giving to him, and he needs it for his job in New Orleans. And he says, God, I want to drive to New Orleans, but I'm not that keen on driving to New Orleans, a 2-day trip by myself. And he said, will you guys come with me? And I said, no freaking way. I'm not driving all the way to New Orleans. That's horrible. I hate driving a 2-day drive. And then I changed my tune because I said, how many opportunities am I going to have to take a long car drive with this extraordinary human being who actually wants to take a long car drive with me? Like, it literally might be only one more time. Yeah. And I said, I'm stepping up. We're going to New Orleans. And so, it didn't seem like a great idea when we were at a Taco Bell in Mississippi eating lunch, but I'm totally glad that I did it, because I literally might not do that again. And when we think about it in those ways, it is concentrating. I really encourage you guys, you should talk to Laura Carstensen at Stanford, who has done a lot of this kind of research, showing, for instance, that as people get older, they have fewer friends, for instance. Their friendship network shrinks. And it seems like that's a sad story. But what's going on is that the people at the periphery are being actively eliminated. So you can spend your time with people you actually deeply care about. And so the sense that time is fleeting concentrates our minds and allows us to make decisions that do better at making decisions that are long-term good for us in a deep way, rather than superficially exciting in a short-term way.
I almost wonder too if something like the car trip with your son, and there's so many other examples of this, were at the time, as you actually did it, were at least during moments a pain in the ass. As you're sitting there on this long car ride, eating at Taco Bell. But in 10 years, that's going to create a level of nostalgia that's off the charts. And that makes these regrets even harder, because even while we're doing it, you're like, this sucks. But in the future, it's going to be one of your greatest memories.
Absolutely right. Absolutely. There is this, there's another really interesting phenomenon. I just came out, Dan Gilbert at Harvard and a young researcher named Adam Mastriani did a brilliant piece of work recently showing that we have a tendency to think that the present sucks and the past was amazing. And the reason for that is exactly what you're talking about, Morgan, because when we think about the past, we forget what it was like driving through a thunderstorm on a dark road in Alabama. And we remember what it was like saying, God, like, what a great kid. And he's doing such interesting things. And I'm so proud of him. And, I'm so glad to be able to spend this time with him. And, and you remember not the terrible meal at Taco Bell, but you remember you remember this moment when we were in a McDonald's somewhere. And my son is very tall. He's like 6'7". He's very, very tall. And some little kid says to him, do you play in the NBA? And are you in the NBA? And my son says, almost. And then the kid asked him to sign his shirt. Wow. So you have that kind of so that's just a random moment. And so I'm not going to remember the thunderstorm in Alabama. I'm not going to remember the crappy hotel in Chattanooga. I'm not going to remember the awful Taco Bell meal in Mississippi. But over time, as I reflect back on that, I'm going to remember it's so exciting to have this kid with this cool job in New Orleans that he was launched on. And what a funny moment we had at that McDonald's where they thought some little kid thought he played in the NBA.
What a great spot.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. It was only a few weeks ago, really, that, Morgan and I were messaging each other. I think our Instagram algorithm had figured out, that we are parents of young children. It's amazing to hear this and where your kids are. We have like 4 and 7-year-olds respectively. So we're going through it, but our social media algos had figured out we're suckers for the memories and not wanting, and there was the one, Morgan, that you shared with me about the time machine. It was the next time your kids are melting down and shouting in your face and acting horrible. Imagine you're 80 years old and you get a time machine and you only get to go to one moment in time. And it's that one, the one that you're being shouted out in your face by your kid. And the only thing you're going to be thinking to yourself and saying to your child is, give me more. Yes, keep shouting, have at it, and then you just give them a hug. And we're like, dang, like, and for now many weeks, Morgan, I don't know if you still think about that one, but I do, and to then hear the story about driving on a road trip to New Orleans, is proof in the pudding right there.
Can I see, Doug? Can I see your thought experiment and raise you on that? So I've done this little kind of exercise with. Okay, so I'm like 20 years ahead of you guys because my kids are in their 20s. All right, but for parents of my ilk, I've said this: how much? Imagine you could get in a time machine, and I got a thing about I'm texting today, having to do with my 24-year-old daughter. All right, so imagine a parent of a 24-year-old and say, listen. Here's what you can do. I got this time machine here in my office. You can get into it. It can take you back 20 years, and you can read a story to your 4-year-old daughter who's now 24. How much would you pay for that?
Ugh.
Right? And you can. I mean, you build this thing. You can make a lot of money, man, based on my limited sample of parents of kids in their 20s. Like, oh my God, I would pay. I don't even know. It's like I would pay almost any price for that moment. But I remember as a parent of a 4-year-old saying, oh my God, another freaking story. I don't know if I can deal with this.
You know what's so interesting you bring this up? My daughter is 4. And last night, as we're getting ready for bed, my wife said, do you want to read to her? And I said, no, I'm kind of tired. Last night that happened.
Well, wait till you get old and creaky like me, and you will look back and you will forget all the meltdowns and all the pain and all the cleaning up and all the difficulty. And you will say, wow, if only I could go back in time and read a story to 4-year-old Eliza who wanted nothing more in her life at that moment than to be read the book Yoko for the 87th time.
But I also wonder if whether the older generation is just as oblivious to what it was like when you had kids who are 4, as the younger generation is to how much you're going to miss them when they're 24. I always have older friends who say, oh, you're going to miss these moments with your young kids. And I'm like, really? Because this is hard. This is really hard. I haven't slept in weeks and our house is a mess. And I wonder, like, am I oblivious to what the future is going to be, or do they just not remember how hard this stage was?
Yes, it's both. One of the other things that you think about is, at least, I mean, I hate to sound like the grizzled old veteran, but one of the things that happens over time to us as professionals of any kind is that you get pretty good at something, and as you get pretty good at something, it becomes much more difficult to get incrementally better at it, and that can be frustrating depending on how much you have an urge for growth and learning. And so what I'm starting to do is do some things that I'm not very good at, largely because so I can get that kind of hit of a learning curve that goes up. So let me be specific. I just came back from I just took a 2-week intensive acting course in New York, having never studied acting before. And the reason I did it, I think there's some great insights for writers in understanding acting. That's a reason that I did it. But the other reason that I did it is that I don't know how to do it. And so I was able to, and I said to my wife when I'm taking this course, I'm doing 3 hours a night. I'm memorizing scenes. She's running lines with me. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a total novice. I was never in a high school play. And I loved every second of it because it's like, oh my God, this is what it's like to learn and grow like this rather than like this. And so I just think that the more we can look for ways to recreate that slope, even if we're starting from a low base, I find that really fulfilling. And if we look at it through the lens of regret, there is no way on God's green earth 10 years from now I'm going to look back and say, oh, what a waste of time. I shouldn't have taken that acting class. No way. I'm going to take more, first of all. But I can totally see looking back 10 years from now and saying, oh, I can't believe I spent 2 weeks in June of 2023 answering email, which I didn't do because I was acting.
I would imagine that is mostly true for people who have big success when they're young. Like if you're a pro athlete and you're amazing at age 25, almost certainly you're going to be worse at 35 and probably done by 35. And for those people, it's like if you can't get incrementally better, the more you're going to kind of stall at that phase.
I think it's true for all kinds of professionals. I think it's true. I think I hear it from friends of mine in my age who are doctors, who are professors. You know, I've taught this course, I've taught this particular subject, 19 years in a row. And so the 20th year that I teach it is not going to be that much better. I'll try to make it a little bit better, but it's actually not going to be that much better. I've been seeing patients in my, OB-GYN profession practice for 21 years, and I care about every patient, and I try to give every patient the best care that I could possibly give them. And yet, I'm only becoming an incrementally better OB-GYN compared to last year. And that's okay. That's what it means to be good at something. But there's a cost. And, and depending on how obsessive you are, it's a cost that some people don't want to bear. And if we also refract this through the lens of longevity, then it suggests that what we want to do is we want to actually maybe have a life full of maybe bolder reinventions than we typically have configured our lives to be.
Well, Dan, I think you're the best in the world at what you do, and this conversation's been a perfect example of that. So thank you so much for joining us doing this.
Thanks to Daniel Pink for joining us here today. He is the author of several New York Times bestsellers, including Drive, The Power of Regret, and To Sell is Human. That'll do it for this episode of Mind Your Money. If you enjoyed listening in, be sure to hit the subscribe button to keep up with our latest shows. Once again, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.